Hi, everybody. Yeah, I want to go with human behavior and the schools of the future. In other words, if you raise children, which are very curious, children want to know about everything. And I can insist if you answer their questions scientifically, as best you can, instead of fairy tales, you will prepare your children for a better mental outlook in the future. Now, the children themselves, at an age before you can even talk to them, say they're 3 months old, if you want to communicate with them earlier, what you have to do is arrange a method of making contact with children. For example, if I put a rubber balloon in the crib and the child touches it and lights go on the ceiling, the child will eventually realize touching the balloon makes the lights go on the ceiling. If you put a different colored balloon in there and they touch it, then lights would go on the wall in a different fashion. They'd be either up and down or a circular pattern. So the child learns to touch the balloon to affect different patterns. This is before language, before they speak language. So I would say that if you want to condition a child early to decipher whether they can see color or not, you can put different colored balloons in, and when they touch the different balloons, different things happen. There are other things you can do. You can take them for a walk and teach them about nature. You can teach them about how the continents were once joined together and they disengaged and you got continental drift. You don't need to read fairy tales. You don't need to join the Mickey Mouse Club. What you need to do is teach them the physical sciences as best you can. You tell them what continent means before you talk about continental drift. You talk about land mass. You talk about dumping waste material into the ocean and how it damages it. And you talk about genetic engineering. Children can understand much more than you think when they can talk. And you can tell them about those things. And children are curious about everything. And it's a very good idea to not talk to them in baby talk, but talk to them about reality. And give them responsibility when they're very early, very young. Give them responsibility in helping mommy with the dishes or helping daddy, but give them responsibility. Don't do everything for them. Ask them questions. In other words, what I used to do, I'd make a model of a house and I glue the doors on crooked and I put the windows in the wrong place. And my children would say to me, Daddy, the door is crooked. And I'd say, well, it looks all right to me. Then I'd say, well, will you try to straighten it out? And then they help and they straighten it out and they feel good about it. When they say, Daddy, will you draw a picture for me? Say, no, but I'll teach you how to draw. In other words, try not to solve too many problems for them. Try to get them to participate. And that's very important. If you don't understand the meaning of conditioning, it means whatever the child is exposed to in values. If daddy beats mommy, the child will pick that up. If daddy is patriotic, you'd be surprised what a child can hear and what a child does. But if you bring up a child with erroneous values, Mickey Mouse clubs, things like that, you damage the child. If you teach a child you're a Lutheran and you're proud of it, you must tell them that the Catholics believe what they believe and the Protestants believe what they believe, and that they're all subject and victims of culture or victims of environment. You teach them not to get mad at other children, if you can. You use the best method you know of. Say that they're just as sure as their views as you are of yours. And so when you begin to work with children, you begin to work with them teaching them things. The best thing you can teach them is an introduction to science. how scientists arrive at their decisions. They don't make decisions. Scientists arrive at decisions. If they take a piece of metal and they twist it, they give you the resistance to twist. When they compress it, they give you the metal's resistance to compression. When they pull on it, they give you the metal's resistance to tension. You have to teach them how scientists arrive at decisions and how politicians make decisions to win approval. In other words, politicians, when they speak to people, they say things that people like to hear. Whereas scientists, if everybody believed the earth is flat, the scientists show them the reasons why they've accepted the fact that the earth is round. They begin to demonstrate and show people. They don't cater to people. They don't say the earth is a little round and a little flat. You have to tell people things as they are. And you have to show them why you or how you come to those conclusions. When they say everyone has a right to their own opinion, tell them that you don't know what they mean by that. Does that mean that a man might say we'll never get to the moon? We don't need that. We need a person to say, I know nothing about rockets. I don't know anything about space. Therefore, I can't answer the question as to what I think man can get to the moon. When people learn to say, I don't know, which is very important, you can begin to communicate with people. When they begin to expound on all kinds of things without any experience, you have to point out in a nice way that you used to do the same thing until you learn more about the scientific method. The scientific method is to put your ideas to test to see if they work. That's mainly what has to be done. Now, if you have any questions about what I've talked about up to now, please write them down or communicate them so that I can answer them.
Okay, the first question would be, how do you persuade someone of the importance of RBE without hurting their ego? And I guess that was answered in the past.
You tell them about a resource economy, and then you ask them whether they understand what you mean, to get feedback from them. If they don't understand a portion of what you talk about, try to explain it. And try to explain why you accept that and why you don't feel that anybody's opinion is just as good as anybody else's opinion. Tell them why you accept the scientific method more than metaphysical approaches to problems. Because in metaphysical approaches, people use their emotions and their feelings. And the scientist cannot do that. He has to test objects and see whether they correspond with what he learned about them. If they get the same conclusions, it means, if they put it to test, of course, if they get the same conclusions, it means the notions that they read about are valid.
This individual is asking, how would the people willing to resist violently be dealt with during the transition?
Well, you have to reach them and show them that if you spank a child, long after he did something, he doesn't know why he was spanked. If you talk to a child and they don't understand you, try to make it relevant to them. Try to talk to them and see if they understand you. And if they say, yes, I do understand you, Daddy, ask them to tell you what they think you mean. That'll tell you what they know and whether they interpret your language correctly. Always ask a person, do you know what I mean by that? And the person says yes, say repeat it back just so we understand each other.
Sven, are you talking about people who want to be violent for the change?
I guess he's actually referring to those that are willing to resist and use violence for the resistance.
You ask them whether violence really stops people from thinking. Does violence really teach anybody anything, or do they teach you when they disagree with you, you beat them up? Beating them up doesn't teach them anything. You have to teach them something you know that they don't know. If you fail to do that, violence will serve no purpose at all. Violence never serves a purpose except it builds resentment against you.
Surely the level of vocabulary used with young children must be adapted to the age of the child's understanding. I don't mean to use baby talk, but to use a vocabulary they can understand. Do you agree with that? How would you tell a 5-year-old about landmass drift, for example?
You make a model. You point to the earth. You point to continents. And you point to different things until they understand and can repeat back what you said to them. You check it out. You don't just talk to children. Always check it out. Say, do you know how I mean that? Can you tell it to me again, what I just told you? And if they do it accurately, they understand what you said.
Right, the next one's asking, how do you make sure children respond to your teaching as intended? And I guess you just answered that with your last reply. So I go on to the next one. This is in regards to the cities. If you had too many people wanting to live in a specific city, how would the demand be prioritized?
Actually, in the beginning, the planners move into the city. They do the planning, how the city will be built, the interiors, how many people are in the city, and the citizenry would be 18 months or a year and a half or 2 years to be able to build enough cities for all people to move into them. In the beginning, the planners will use the cities as a planning system to plan the first and second or third city. But the citizenry or the occupants, that it might take a year and a half before you can move in. In other words, during the transition, it will be slower. But once the cities are built, people will be educated to how to live in those cities and how to get the maximum out of those cities. How to go to the music centers, the art centers, where they're located. They learn all about the cities and their function. Then they make recommendations of what they'd like to see. And if the recommendations are valid, meaning if they prove attainable, of course we will use it. If people are not satisfied with the cities, they wouldn't want to live in them. So the final test of whether the cities meet people's needs is by people who live in them.
So next question is about technocracy. So what is the difference between the Venus Project and Technocracy Incorporated and other technocratic organizations?
Okay. When I was a member, that's all I can talk about, years ago, when I was a member, they had race on the application, and that is irrelevant. They had, when I asked about how come there were no blacks, they said let them start their own section. I said, how come there are no Orientals? They said Orientals cannot understand technology. Well, I disagreed with them and I resigned. I don't know what their views are today. If they accept Orientals and have no race or blacks on the application, then I would say the major difference is that they say they have a design for everything. I have never seen any of their design proposals except the continental hydrology, canals across the continent. But I have never seen any designs of cities, production centers, or anything else. Therefore, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Energy certificates?
Energy certificates would be giving people an appropriate portion of the energy available. The problem with that is we keep improving and modifying the system so that more is available to more people. We would rather make things available to people directly, where they can access television, radio, communication systems just by the fact that they call the access center and tell them what they'd like to have installed in their place of residence. I have never seen anything, although they claim they have answers to many problems. I have never seen drawings of cities, designs of buildings, homes, transportation systems. All I heard is that we'll use more efficient transportation. That doesn't tell me anything.
They don't have methodologies of teaching children creativity, or don't seem to have a good grasp of behaviorism within people, would you
Yes,
say as well?
I would agree with that.
So we got a question regarding the raise of children. So could you elaborate a little bit more about the effective way to raise children? Because that individual is referring to one of your lectures, and where you talk about teaching children how to count dots on a board without pointing at them. What is the purpose of this?
I'm just repeating the question, so I'll just do it aloud. This person is referring to your example of dots on a board, understanding how many dots on the board. What's the significance of that?
Oh, just training the brain to hold information. Sometimes you can see at a glance that there are 5 dots. You don't need to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see 5 dots. And if you draw 5 dots in one place on the blackboard and 5 dots on the other place, the child doesn't need to count them. He can say there are 10 dots visible, 2 sets of 5. If you wish to improve their ability to understand or extract information rapidly, you have to prepare them for it. The dots only represent the method, one method of preparing them for certain types of information. If you put 3 colors on the board, say black, white, and yellow, the child can see that there are 3 colors on the board. How many colors do you see? Instead of counting them, he can say there are 3 colors on the board. And if there's 3,000 and 3,000, they don't need to count. They can say that's 6,000. In other words, if you use examples that are simplified on a blackboard or on some writing pad. And when they draw like a child, if they draw stick figures, say to them, does that person eat anything? They look like they're very skinny. And the child will add mass right away. But if you hang up the children's drawings, you will arrest them at that stage of development. If they draw a house too small and a man too big, ask them how the man gets in that small house. In other words, if they make a bad drawing, criticize the drawing so they understand it, then say to them, do you know what I mean? And they say, yes, tell me what you think I mean, just to make sure that they know what you're talking about.
The next one is asking about the time you spent on that island in the tropics. First thing is, he wants to know the name of that place.
The name of the place was a series of islands called Tuamotu. It's about 300 miles, I think, southeast of Tahiti. It's a long chain of islands with many different tribes. The time I spent there was several months. I don't know exactly how long. But then I left when the Germans occupied Paris. The territory belonged to the French, and I felt that German submarines might be coming to the islands, so I left. That's why I left.
And maybe the reason you went there.
I went there to see what people would be like if they weren't indoctrinated by our schools and our parents. For example, when I arrived, a lot of them were walking around naked. They were swimming naked ever since they were children, and they never had any peeping toms on the island. If boys and girls swim nude when they're very young, they don't look at one another, and there are no peeping toms, and there are no fetishes, because they look at the eyes of a girl when they talk to her. They don't study her body because it's been exposed. In other words, if you expose children to nudity when they're very young, you don't get any peeping toms and you don't get any fetishes. So I would say that in the future, boys and girls will swim nude. They'll go out in the sun when they're very young and walk around nude, and that'll do away with peeping toms. You won't have them anymore. If you don't deal with a problem, if you arrest a peeping tom, he is a victim of culture. You have to undo that by changing the way people behave. If you don't understand that, if boys and girls swim nude, no one collects pictures of nude women. No one looks at magazines of nude women. But they say that's the nature of man. It is not the nature. It's not true. Man reflects his culture. If the culture does not pay attention to certain body parts, if you cover it up, you make people curious. When the missionaries arrived on the islands, they tried to get the girls to wear T-shirts. And the girls had no idea of why they were wearing T-shirts when they went to church. So they cut 2 holes in the T-shirt because they were uncomfortable, so their breasts would hang out. And the missionaries did not understand that. Of course the missionaries don't understand a lot of things because they read a book of myths. They don't understand human behavior. They call it human nature. There's no such thing as human nature. There's only human behavior. And you pick up your behavior from your environment. If you're brought up in Germany, you speak German. If you're brought up in Australia, you speak Australian. If you're brought up in the deep south, you speak with a southern accent. If you're brought up in an uneducated region of the south, you might say, I'm going to get me an American African and beat him up. Well, where do you get that from? You get that from the environment. All racism, all patterns of behavior are picked up from the environment. Every word you use, all the facial expressions. Don't forget that in time, when you were very young, your mother said, this is a glass, that's a light, this is a plate, that's a spoon, over and over again, until you repeated those things. There appears to be no indication that a child inherits anything from the parents except the shape of the ears, the head, the nose, the color of the hair, the eyes. That's hereditary. But language, prejudice, bigotry, investment banking is all learned, and language is learned. No child born in England was ever born speaking English. They have to go to school to learn it. No matter how many years their generation was speaking Chinese, no baby was ever born in China speaking Chinese. They had to go to school to learn the language.
Oh, I just want to mention, somebody made a comment. We had the tour here yesterday, and somebody made a comment and said, you know, they were very, very bright. They were valedictorians in school and had all sorts of awards, but they always were very unhappy. They knew there was something wrong in the culture, and they didn't understand, after listening to Jacques or reading about the Venus Project, they couldn't understand how they couldn't have put this together. You know, they thought it was so simple once you heard about it. But you can't really put this together unless you're exposed to these types of ideas in the culture, because this culture does not expose you to critical thinking or be able to put ideas within the social system together. They don't want you to do that, or they'd have a lot of trouble out there. So you really have to, in order for people to be able to think about these things, you have to introduce it to people. You have to put these ideas into people's heads before they can toss around and think about it and combine it in different ways. And that's a hard job, because a lot of times you approach people and you've read 25 books, you've listened to 32 lectures, and the people you're approaching, they haven't even read the first book. And you come at them with the language of the 25th book, and you wonder why people can't put it together. So you really have to think about the way they were when you didn't read any books or when you've never been exposed.
I would agree with that completely.
Okay, let's get to the next question, which is about something made by our society. How do you think about detractors from within our society, such as competitive sports or video games, and how do we change the people who are immersed into that?
Well, first of all, I think that all competitive sports are really not sports. Usually when you lose a football game, you feel bad, and the other team that won feels good. And sometimes they argue with the umpire, and sometimes they get angry, they get involved in fistfights, which doesn't show social sanity. If you play sports to improve your ability, then you can play tennis against yourself. In the future, they'll have a virtual image of you at the other end, and you play tennis merely to improve your ability to predict the position of the tennis racket in relation to the oncoming ball. There's nothing wrong with improving your ability. There is something wrong, there's something detrimental in the fact that you play games to win. I don't play games to win. I play games to improve my ability, not to beat the other fellow. I get no satisfaction in beating the other fellow, in fighting the other fellow, in wrestling with the other fellow, or running faster than another fellow. I get no pleasure from that. I realize that I run because I like to run, not to beat anybody. I play games because I like predictability of getting a ball, a basketball, into the basket, merely improving my own performance. I don't want to beat the other fellow. If he's 10 times as good as I am, I might ask him questions. What do you aim for? How do you do that? How is it that you get much more accuracy? What's wrong with the way I cast a ball toward the basket? I would ask questions about it, and I would feel that if he can teach me anything, I can learn. If he can't, I just can't learn. Well, first of all, they have to realize that the only thing that they have that they know of is that when you screw in an electric bulb and press the switch, it lights. And if you play a game, it does nothing for you. If a man can run faster than you, it doesn't prove anything but that they can run faster than you. When one team wins a football game, they may have better ways of dodging, better ways of tackling another person, but it doesn't prove anything. It's the same game over and over again. When you design an airplane, it gets better, it gets safer, it gets faster, it improves its landing ability, and is less subject to trouble. And that means something. But the Holy Bible is the same story. It's never updated. It's never updated in relation to what people really find out about human behavior. You can be trained to hate Filipinos, trained to hate Polacks, Swedes, anything else. You can teach people to hate other nations and go to war against them. But you can't do that in a sane society. In a sane society, you teach people that they reflect their culture. It's not their fault, patriotism, whatever they believe in. When our president says, God's on our side, that's a hell of a statement to make. When he said, God bless America, who the hell are you to tell God who to bless? In other words, people make all kinds of assumptions that are detrimental to the well-being of themselves and other people. False beliefs are damaging to people, and 90% of our beliefs are false.
Also, those sport games and competition games and one team against another, it really primes people to go to war as well, us against them type of mentality.
Okay, here's another one asking about his son's behavior. His son's 4-year-old, and he starts beating at him and his mother. And he claims he never saw that from his parents, and so he thinks he put that up from kindergarten. And now his question, is it really so important to bring children to the kindergarten if one or both parents can afford to stay and work at home?
Well, if you're talking about today, I don't agree with today's methods of education, if that's what you want to know. In the future, children will be educated in groups, perhaps no larger than 20 children in a room. And when you educate the children, you use physical demonstrations, always examples, not just verbal. If you say the earth is round, you show them a round world. You show them a flat world, what people formerly believed in. You show them how primitive people made decisions just by asking one another, what do you think? What do you think? And show them the difference between people today. Instead of making decisions, Show them how they arrive at decisions. For example, if you build a bridge, the engineer will ask you how many cars go over that bridge every day in order to determine the best structure. How do they know how many cars go over? They have a rubber tube in front of the bridge, and the cars go over that tube, and that automatically counts the amount of cars. Some people weigh the trucks and the tonnage of weight they carry, so they can tell the engineers what the maximum load is per day on that bridge. How many cars a day, say 75,000 cars a day go over that bridge. That requires a different structure than 10 cars a day. In other words, the more information you can gather, and you have to show children how scientists arrive at a decision. They do not make decisions, they arrive at them. They take a structural member, like an I-beam, and put it in a machine and compress it. And when it folds, they put the load down at what causes that beam to fail. They take a steel tube and twist it, and they measure its torsional strength. Then they pull on it and measure its tensile strength. Then they compress it and measure its compression strength. You have to show children how to arrive at a decision rather than make a decision. Most of the people you talk to make decisions. They don't arrive at them because they're brought up to believe everyone should have a right to their own opinion. That's very dangerous.
This question was about a child who's being sent to kindergarten and it's picking up detrimental behavior, they
answered
thought. Okay, in the beginning.
I was not talking about this monetary system. You can't do anything with your kids in this system. It's already established. We need a new system. I was talking about the new system.
This question is in regards to the ongoing protests with the Occupy movement. He says he's been out teaching and talking about the Venus Project, and he's asking whether you have been getting any support lately out of these movements, and if he should keep going out to all the protests and keep telling about the Venus Project.
I would just check how are your results in talking to people. Do you get anywhere? Are you rejected? I can't answer that unless I talk to the individual. And when he talks to people about the Venus Project, what kind of resistance do you get? I have to know that in order to answer those questions.
We are steadily getting new people, though, and it's wonderful for anybody to go out with the Occupy Wall Street movement and discuss these ideas. We're all for it. It's good practice for people as well to do that.
Just let me know where your failures are, what kind of opposition you get, and I might be able to tell you what to do about it.
Good.
Yeah, so therefore I would suggest that an individual would file the questions author through the official email address regarding the questions. That's it for the moment. There are a couple of other questions that I definitely know that were asked on sessions we had before, and if you would please be so kind and go to the download section, which is which you can find if you click on the room. There is a description on the right hand side. If you scroll all the way down, in the bottom it has the link to previous recordings of seminars and questions answers.
I was the one that asked the protest questions. I've been going out, I live in Australia, I've been going to the protests in Australia, Occupy, and a lot of other refugee ones as well. I've been teaching about the Venus Project. I've been getting lots of support from random people, but I haven't really been receiving negative feedback. They all agree that the monetary system has a lot of problems and they want to see it change, but I don't know if they're scared or they just don't know what they want, or I'm not entirely sure, but mainstream, the ones that I've been talking to, just regular people off the street, even business people, they can see the problems that we're having, and the ones that I've spoken to said that they will come and check out the Venus Project and a resource-based economy, and I was just really wondering how we're going on that front, because it's nice to see that the people at least that I talk to, the mainstream people, are generally accepting of some kind of social change towards the better, something that they don't know about. So, yeah.
Not quite sure of your question with that, but that's wonderful. Keep up the good work. As I said, there are more people coming and joining all the time. There is a flux in the movement and the coordinators who actually come and go as well. So
It's a good idea to read our book, The Best That Money Can't Buy. Before you engage in conversation, try to become familiar with the Venus Project. Otherwise, you go off on your own in so many different directions that we can't maintain coordination. Try to become familiar by looking at our website, by reading our book, The Best That Money Can't Buy. Read it at least twice. It'll give you different methods of approaching people.
Jacques, what kind of foods do you recommend people eat on a daily basis, and specifically what kind of foods would you recommend to boost brain performance?
They're not available today. You live in a monetary system where artificial flavoring, artificial coloring, and even organic food may not be grown without pesticides. You don't know that for sure. But in a resource-based economy, we don't spray poisons on food. We don't change and put artificial coloring on the food to make it look good.
or genetic.
Okay, well, what do you eat?
It's very hard to make recommendations.
What do you eat? He's asking.
I eat whatever I can get in terms of organic food. As near as possible, I tend to eat chicken or vegetables, and I tend to eat them fresh, cooked. And I don't know what's been done to the plant. We try to wash our plants very thoroughly because there's so much sprays and poisons on plants. It's hard to tell who does what. So it's very hard for me to make recommendations in this society. People always ask me, what do you recommend in this society? How do I know? I don't know more than you know of what they do to food. So I'm against genetic engineering unless we've tested it over a long period of time to make sure to make sure that the negative effects are not too powerful. But I know that today we pollute the oceans, the rivers, we spray poisons onto the plants, and we know that it goes down to the water table and affects the water you drink. The society is so loused up in so many different ways, I can't buck it. It's easier to design a new system rather than try to correct and patch up the old one.
Any other questions?
I have
Yeah,
a question about human behavior. Why is it that sometimes even rich people tend to be violent?
Being rich or poor has no effect on violence. Violence is what you pick up from television, radio, cowboy pictures, books you read, and the friends you have. Violence is learned by the subculture you live in. The Ku Klux Klan may want to beat up a black person or an Oriental because they're brought up to do so. In the future, children will not be brought up as racist. They will extend maximum courtesy to all people and understand where they're coming from and where their values come from. When a person speaks with a Southern accent, you know they're from the South. When they speak with a German accent, you say, gee, are you from Germany? They say, how did you know that? By their dialect, that's how you know it.
Also, a lot of wealthy people are making a lot of money on war. It's very profitable. So they profit on violence.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's still a bit related to the islands Jacques was in the tropics. I would just like examples of similar societies, basically peaceful egalitarian societies. I think this is useful because we come across a lot of people that think this is not possible. and to give them a few examples that they could check out by themselves would be good. If you have a few other names of cultures, societies, tribes, whatever.
Well, they're only peaceful for a while until other people need their resources. If few nations control water or food, the nations without it will invade the nations with it. If you build a community, say of 1,000 people that are self-sufficient, and there's a terrible economic downfall, then the people that have no access to food will invade your community. You can no longer live to yourself. You must include all the people of the earth, and you must design a system where all people get a piece of the pie. If they don't, you're going to have trouble. I don't care what kind of private society you build, unless you take care of everybody. You can't put an end to war unless you share the earth's resources with all the world's people. If you don't do that, you'll have wars continually, no matter what your moral philosophy is.
The people of the island where Jacques was at, didn't they used to take the young people when it started to get too many people and give them a boat and point to the sea so they'd find their own island? If they ran out of bananas, they'd start to hide bananas, if that was an occurrence there. It's just that they had enough to eat and had enough to share amongst the population.
What you have to learn is that you must maintain a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of the island. Do you understand what that means? If your population exceeds what the island can support, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have arguments, people stealing food from other people.
Well, I have a technical one. Hello. A professor told me there is not a great availability of geothermal energy on a continental level. So once there is a great potential in Iceland, it will become the bigger European giant energy-wise. Can you comment on the scarcity of possibilities in the exploration of geothermal energy?
Let me see if I heard you right. You said your professor said that there wasn't enough geothermal energy?
There isn't a lot, yeah, on a continental level, so it isn't easy to explore.
You could write to the Geothermal Energy Department in the United States and they will send you a chart. There's far more energy than we can ever use. A lot of it's under the oceans called fumaroles, and it runs along the west coast all the way up through Alaska. There's a lot of geothermal untapped energy. There's wave energy. There's harnessing the Gulf Stream, building turbines under the water, collecting energy from the tides. There's so many different sources of energy that can fulfill our needs easily. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
How can I inform religious people on a resource-based economy?
How can he inform religious people on a resource-based economy?
By talking to them about religion, telling them the origin of religion. People would like to believe, and they can't figure out how all of this came about. They have no idea what produces nature, animals, the sky, the clouds. So they invented stories. And the different stories, you can tell religious people, once people honestly believed there were 24 different gods. Some people believed in 4 gods. They had different concepts, and if God is one person, and you go into a land where people believe there are many gods, they're going to disagree with you if they're brought up that way. What you have to show them is how the earth is suspended in space, how the earth operates, how the sun enables plants to grow. You can't teach people that plants grow. They don't grow unless there's sunlight, nutrients in the soil, water, moisture, temperature. Of themselves, plants cannot grow. Neither can people. They must consume food. And when you eat meat, it's converted to human cells. When you eat vegetables, they're converted to human cells. All the stuff that you're made of is what you've been eating, and that stuff existed continuously. They say, how did all this begin? The word begin came from the Bible, in the beginning. Things do not necessarily begin. The contents of the universe undergo continuous change. The plants that existed 10,000 years ago are a little different today. All things change. We know that. We know that by digging into geological rocks, and we can find the shape of trees. Certain types of trees 2 million years ago, they were different than the trees are today. So all things change. That's something we know. And if we know that all things change, we know that the word beginning doesn't make sense. You're made up of material that always existed in plants, in the oceans. The body materials that we're made of always did exist, but they become converted from one system to another. All things change. You can't always teach religious people. It depends on how hardwired they are. If the brain is all associated with the Seventh-day Adventist church and teachings, it's very hard to break a pathway unless they're absolutely honest. I find that most religious people don't even know how to be honest. To say, I don't know where all this came from. I don't know what makes life. I don't know what makes cancer. That's being honest. When you say you have cancer because God is punishing you for the evil deeds you did, you're making that up. You don't know that because the Bible says don't judge other people unless you be judged. The Bible says don't kill. It doesn't say you can kill Wednesdays and Thursdays. The Bible says love your enemy. I've never met a Christian that is a person that behaved that way.
I would like to encourage everyone to also listen at the various lectures and so on the Venus Project YouTube channel, because many of these subjects were already dealt with there, and I think that even in the last few uploaded videos there are many proposals of Jacques how to approach different people with different value systems and so on. I think this is very comprehensive library, so to say, and I would encourage everyone to listen to that too.
You're talking about the YouTube, I think, because we're constantly putting new things up there, new lectures from Jacques on different topics. And those are just very short clips of like a whole hour lecture that we're putting out there as well. Maybe after you finish the book, you can start going through the lectures.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant.
Great.
So just to broaden the comprehension and so on, because many questions that are asked here were already dealt with in these lectures, and I think it's a very broad range of knowledge there that people can listen to, and it's very convenient to listen to on YouTube, I think.
Yes, it is.
A small question about lectures.
Sure, go ahead.
Some of the lectures there, as you said, is just small clips. Do you plan to upload whole lectures on YouTube? And for example, one of the lectures, Jacques talks about how people perceive primitive cultures more happier than more advanced technological cultures. Can he speak about that right now?
I'm sorry, somebody was just talking to me. Can you just repeat the question at the end? We have uploaded entire lectures. I think there are several of them, and we will do that periodically.
No, I mean from 70s, lectures from 70s. In one of the lecture, Jacques talks about how people perceive more primitive cultures happier than more developed technological cultures. Can he talk about that more, please?
He's saying from one of your old lectures that people perceive primitive cultures happier.
If the primitive culture has access to resources, they may be more peaceful for the time they have access to resources. But primitive cultures depends on how much resources they have and how large their population is. If you let your population explode and pass the amount of resources you can produce, you're going to have trouble. Primitive cultures don't know how to increase the agricultural yield. They don't know also how to do research in growing more food. They don't have the technology or the knowledge to be able to surpass their present state of affairs. So when you teach agriculture and you teach people how to relate to one another without using violence, then I would say that would be the beginning of the scientific age. We are not civilized yet. I say that over and over again because people don't seem to understand. We are very primitive in our behavior. In the future, we will teach people how to disagree without getting angry and how to attain a higher standard of living through knowledge, not wishes.
Also, we wouldn't really equate less technology or primitive people as being more happy or more technology that you'd be less happy. It's really how they're abusing and misusing the technology today. We could be much more fulfilled in the future if we turned our technology towards benefiting people rather than abusing people, as I'm sure all of you know. Any other questions?
Some people may say that the Venus project is idealistic. Can I respond to that?
If people are real, they will point to the shortcomings of the Venus Project. They might say your canals are not deep enough to permit the passage of freighters. In other words, you can't say the Venus Project is idealistic. You have to point out that the cities that we propose do not work because they require more water delivery or so. You have to point out the specific areas, not say it'll never work. Fresco is idealistic. He doesn't understand. Point out what he doesn't understand.
It's really kind of one-upmanship when they say that.
Yes.
As well.
If I may, I have an idea towards the former question of how do we relate to certain religions, and specifically within the Christian religion, there is an idea of earth stewardship, and we're supposed to be stewards of the earth, taking good care of it for God. I'm not really a Christian, but because I was raised as one, I learned about this, and that is a way to broach the subject in a way that doesn't clash with their cultural norms and ideologies. Just as a suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, that's a good suggestion, but I would say this. Stewardship of the earth without telling people how to do that. How do you do that? What do you do? Do you control the tides, the weather? What do you do? In other words, if a person says people ought to learn to live together in peace and harmony, that all sounds very good. How do you do it? How do you attain it? If they don't provide the method of attaining it, you will have just as many problems as you had before. Whenever you talk idealism, if only people would learn to be more generous, honest with one another, and tell the truth. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? If you don't spell out how do you accomplish it, you leave people in midair. So what the Venus Project works on is how to, what to do about it.
It also gives a physical reference as to what the cities would be like, what would the technologies be like to achieve that as well.
We teach children how to relate to one another without getting angry. I told you that before. We teach children how to do things, how to solve problems, rather than depend on other people. In other words, if people learn more about psychology, about human behavior, and read our books, they will then be able to talk to other people using a broader frame of reference. If you don't read our books, you'll remain where you're at.
Jock, approaching reading your books, what's a good approach to learn them in a conceptual way?
To read chapter by chapter at your meetings and discuss each chapter. As you move on to the next chapter, you read that at the next meeting, so that people come to each meeting discussing each chapter. As you bypass them and learn them, you move on to the next chapter. If you don't do that, you're going to have all kinds of opinions and all kinds of views, some relevant, some less relevant.
Hey, in the video where you told us about how you set up your place in Venus, you said some people who said they loved the environment were living in wood houses, like that was inconsistent. I've read wood houses are the most sustainable and less pollutant. How do you respond to that?
I respond to it because if there's a forest fire, the wooden houses go, unless you can make the wood fireproof. Until that day, we tend not to make things of wood because a lot of houses are lost in forest fires, which are started sometimes by human negligence, sometimes by lightning, many different causes. But wooden houses have termites and they require poisonous sprays which you blow out of the building, which pollutes the air. Wooden houses also cut down the forest. We need forests. We need forests to produce oxygen. So I would say that if we can use the sands of the Sahara Desert and work out a new kind of building material, composite rails, that are resistant to fire, that are resistant to wear and maintenance, this is what we need. We need more research in heart disease, cancer, all the problems that affect humanity. That's what people will be working on, the problems that affect all people.
Yes, Jack, I'm sorry, but I've seen research about wood and wood construction, and there is a possibility that the wood is protected in a way chemically that it doesn't burn. It is more sustainable and more it's stronger than steel actually. And there is another ways also to protect against termites as well using chemicals.
Do the chemicals outgas and poison people? We have to have a lot of information before we install that. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying we may need much more information on what the materials are that make a building fireproof that you put on wood. Does that outgas and affect the lungs of people? In other words, we have to know all the effects, the negative and the positive.
May I ask something?
Yes, we can take one more.
I'm very interested in Jack's generally opinion about Occupy Wall Street movement and other things that happened.
He's interested in your opinion generally about Occupy Wall Street.
If you don't
Yes, yes, and other things that happened.
What other things? Well, let's just deal with Occupy Wall Street.
Other things connected. I mean, gathering of people in other cities and etc.
I don't think attacking Wall Street will do anything unless you talk to the majority of people about the Venus Project. We're not interested in talking about the limitations of the system. What do you do about it? We have to have a different kind of society. If you don't want war, if you don't want poverty, unemployment, you have to rearrange social affairs in accordance with the teachings of the Venus Project. If you don't do that, you'll have the same problems no matter who you protest against.
It seems like they're trying to patch up things within this system, trying to get more ethical leaders or a little bit more of the piece of the pie, but they don't seem to know where to put the blame or what the problem really is. And I think if more people go out there and introduce these ideas during the gatherings, it's great that they're annoyed enough to get out in the streets. If people can go out and talk about the Venus Project during that time, it would be very useful.
Yes.
I would actually recommend just going to one of the Occupies with a bunch of information like I did to Occupy Philadelphia. I had a really good time. I got on the people's mic. I told people about the Venus Project and about the ideas within it and about how we could use these ideas to transition from all the problems that we're having today within the corrupted system and turn it into something different, turn it into something better. I mean, get involved with those sorts of things if you want to send out your ideas of activism as well. I mean, that's the easiest way, is to just get down there and get involved, get on the people's mic. Saying mic check and having everybody repeat it is a really powerful moment, and you can feel it. And when you can then share those ideas with 100 people in one shot like that, it's amazing. and I recommend it to anyone.
I would have to agree. I did something similar like that, and I think people want change. It's just that they don't have the information to know how change is going to happen. So I found a lot of people accepting of the Venus Project. They just never heard of it, and they wouldn't know how to implement it and a lot of other things.
That's great. You can direct them back to the website, and they could see the designs as well, and implementing it will take just really meeting the right people and having the right conditions within society.
I would agree with that. If you don't offer people,
Go ahead, start over.
if you don't offer people a new way of thinking, they'll repeat the old process over and over again. That's what you have to do. Present the new ideas.
I have one last question to do with the reading list, if I may.
Okay, another last question.
Hey, thank you very much. Now, first, before we mentioned reading the books with the team on here, on the research team. What if you've got a little more time and you wanted to maybe do it like school, how you've got several subjects in one day? Is it a good idea to like look at the economic books, look at some of the ocean books, look at some of the semantics books, all like in one day?
Well, I'd say you could read the books on the book list at your leisure. You know, those help also. They give you little bits and pieces. They don't put it together into a system as Jacques has done. Those are some of the past reference books that have helped him in just certain individual areas. So I'd say with the study groups, read the materials that Jacques and we are presenting so you can get a better understanding of putting the whole system together towards a specific direction. A positive direction.
Roxanne, Joe, do you feel like answering another one, or shall we postpone that till next week's seminar?
Okay, another question.
Another last
question. Okay, Marcus, go ahead.
How do I suggest for the reading list on the Venus Project?
Just email it to meadows@thevenusproject.com. That'd be great. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending this seminar, and as I pointed out earlier, thanks to Jacques and Roxanne for being here and answering all our questions.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it, and thanks very much, Sven, for the help.
Yes, we appreciate the opportunity to attempt to answer your questions.
We'll talk to you next week.